Okay, let's unpack this. Today, we're looking at a document that, well, on the surface, it might sound like the most bureaucratic, sleep-inducing PDF you could possibly stumble
It
across.
really does sound pretty dry at first glance.
Right. It's officially titled The Parcel Review GIS Metadata for Cache County. And our sources note it was last revised in October 2025. Now, I know what you're thinking.
Why are we looking at metadata?
Exactly. Metadata, parcel reviews. Why are we dedicating a whole deep dive to local government paperwork? But I promise you, by the time we are done today, you're going to look at the ground beneath your feet in a completely different way.
It is entirely understandable to see a title like that and just want to look away. But GIS metadata is, quite simply, the data about the data.
The invisible blueprint.
Exactly. GIS stands for Geographic Information Systems. So think of it as the invisible digital blueprint of a community. Every piece of land you stand on, every house you might buy, every road you drive on, or a field you decide to build on, is governed by these overlapping invisible layers of information.
Layers that most of us never even see.
Never. And without this background documentation telling us where the information actually came from, when it was gathered, and how accurate it is, those digital maps would just be pretty pictures. Instead, they are the legal and physical reality of the county.
And that is our mission for this deep dive. We are going to decode this dense, seemingly dry document to reveal what is actually an incredible multi-generational patchwork quilt of data.
It really is a patchwork.
We're talking about information from massive federal agencies, state departments, and even hyper-local fire districts, all stitched together over decades to shape the physical world around us. Let's start with how this source material reveals a literal map of technological evolution.
Oh, the elevation data.
Yes. When you look at the elevation and slope data for the county, you can see how our ability to measure the Earth has completely transformed. For general slopes, the county uses a standard 10-meter digital elevation model, or DEM, provided by the USGS.
Right, a fairly standard baseline.
But then, for the valley floor, they switched to a hyper-precise 0.5-meter model, relying on 2016 LiDAR technology. Can you break down what the actual shift in measurement means for someone just looking at the map?
What's fascinating here is how the map itself serves as a timeline of human technological progress. To put those numbers in perspective, a 10-meter digital elevation model means that every single data point on that map represents a square that is 10 meters by 10 meters.
That's pretty big.
Yeah, that's roughly the size of a small house or a large swimming pool. Whatever the average elevation is within that big square, well, that's the single number the map gets. It paints a very broad, fuzzy picture of a mountainside.
Like a low-resolution photo.
Precisely. But then you transition to the valley floor with that 0.5-meter model using LiDAR. LiDAR involves flying an aircraft over the land and shooting thousands of laser pulses down to the ground to measure the exact distance. A 0.5-meter grid is about the size of a pizza box.
A pizza box? Wow.
Yeah. Zooming in from a pixel the size of a house down to a pixel the size of a pizza box, right where people actually live and build.
That is a massive jump in clarity. And you see that same kind of technological whiplash in other parts of the source logs, too. I noticed the records for something called the sand and gravel data layer.
Oh, yeah, the aggregate data.
Right. This isn't just a uniform snapshot taken from a satellite yesterday, is it?
Not at all. It's a historical composite. According to the Utah Geological Survey update from April 2006, the mapping of these resources happened in very different eras.
And they actually named the people who did it, which I love.
Yes, credit where it's due. The document names the specific scientists involved: Bryce Tripp, Sharon Wakefield, and Taylor Bowden. Their work shows that the resources on the east side of the valley were digitized way back in 1986 at a 1 to 50,000 scale.
Okay.
But if you look at the west side of the valley, that was digitized in the late 1990s at a much sharper 1 to 10,000 scale.
I think a lot of people hear those map scales and their eyes just glaze over. What is the practical difference between 1 to 50,000 and 1 to 10,000 for, say, a city planner or a developer?
It changes everything about how you can use the map. A 1 to 50,000 scale means 1 inch on the map equals 50,000 inches in the real world. That is almost a mile.
So super zoomed out.
Exactly. At that scale, you are looking at a blurry blob that represents an entire neighborhood. You can broadly say, well, there might be gravel somewhere in this general area.
Right. Not super helpful if you're trying to dig a quarry.
Exactly. But at 1 to 10,000, you're getting much closer. 1 inch is about 800 feet. At that scale, you can start making out the granular details of individual city blocks.
Wait, hold on. You're telling me that if I pull up a map of sand and gravel in this county, the left side of the screen's from the 90s and the right side is from 1986. How does a city even plan around that?
with a lot of caution. It shows how a map is never just finished. It's a living, breathing document constantly being patched and upgraded.
Like software.
Very much like software. You have to know the limitations of the data you are looking at. If you're a developer buying land on the east side, you have to realize the geological data you're relying on is essentially being viewed through a blurry technological lens from the mid-'80s.
That is wild to think about. You mentioned the earth we build on, but what about the things flowing through it? That leads us straight into what I like to call the water web.
The water data is incredibly complex.
It really is. When I was looking through the footnotes on the FEMA floodplain boundaries, I was genuinely shocked by how far back this tracking goes. The source notes that the 1980 floodplain data was digitized from actual paper maps.
Literal paper and ink.
Just picture someone meticulously tracing those paper lines with a ruler and a pen, and then someone years later trying to scan or trace those hand-drawn lines into a computer system. Then, the logs jump to a 2011 release of floodplain data.
A big leap forward.
And finally, there is the modern 2021 floodplain data. But here's the kicker. That 2021 data wasn't even officially adopted by the county until May 9th, 2023. Why does it take 2 whole years to adopt a map that is already finished?
Because of what that data represents in the real world. Flood maps aren't just scientific curiosities. They dictate flood insurance rates, property values, and building codes.
Money,
A
basically.
lot of money. If a new map suddenly places 50 homes into a high-risk flood zone, those homeowners are going to face massive insurance hikes. That 2-year gap between 2021 and 2023 represents town hall meetings, public pushback appeals, and intense bureaucratic friction.
It takes an enormous amount of time for the scientific data to become the legal reality.
Exactly.
That makes total sense. You are literally moving the invisible lines of financial liability. And looking at the rest of the water data in this document, it seems like just getting the different government agencies to agree on where the water is presents its own monumental challenge.
It's a massive interagency puzzle. Think about the sheer number of meetings it takes to get the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, which provides the wetlands data, to align with the Utah Department of Environmental Quality.
They handle the source water protection areas?
Yes, those are the zones that keep drinking water safe. Meanwhile, the major waterways are mapped by a totally different entity, the Utah Automated Geographic Reference Center.
3 different groups just for surface water.
Right. It's a massive bureaucratic lift, just so the county can draw a single blue line on a map indicating a safe drinking water source.
And we haven't even gone underground yet. I noticed references to water table depths and something called aquifer recharge discharge areas.
Yes, the water table depths are provided by the USDA's Natural Resources Conservation Service via their web soil survey.
That sounds incredibly specific.
It is, and the aquifer layers are absolutely critical. For anyone living in the American West, knowing where water enters and exits, the underground aquifer is vital for understanding the capability of the land.
Because water is everything out here.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You can't just look at a dry surface and assume it's safe to build an industrial chemical plant.
Yeah.
You have to know what the water is doing 50 feet below your boots.
Because a spill there could contaminate the drinking water for an entire valley.
Exactly.
You mentioned water moving 50 feet below our boots, but water isn't the only thing moving down there. The ground itself is shifting. Here's where it gets really interesting. The hidden hazards beneath your feet.
The geology hazard layers are definitely eye-opening.
They read a bit like a disaster movie script. You have faults, surface ruptures, landslides, and my personal favorite, purely because it sounds so terrifying, liquefaction potential.
It is a great term.
Can you explain what liquefaction actually is for someone who hasn't taken a geology class?
It is exactly as bad for a house's foundation as it sounds. Liquefaction is a phenomenon where saturated solid ground temporarily turns into a thick liquid during the intense shaking of an earthquake.
Oh, wow.
Imagine you have a house built on perfectly solid soil. An earthquake hits, the vibrations increase the water pressure between the soil particles, and suddenly the dirt beneath your foundation starts acting like quicksand.
The house simply sinks or tilts?
Precisely. It loses all structural support.
That is terrifying. So if I am buying a house in this county, how do I know if I'm sitting on potential quicksand? Are they just guessing based on the soil type?
Not at all. The document reveals just how much rigorous academic fieldwork goes into tracking this. The liquefaction data the county uses was actually digitized from maps provided by Utah State University.
Okay, local experts.
Yes. Those maps were originally published in 4 different Utah Geological Survey contract reports way back in 1994.
Wait, 1994. So we know the ground is risky, but how up to date is the science on these earthquakes? Are we really relying on field work from 30 years ago to tell us if a new subdivision might sink tomorrow?
Geology generally moves at a very slow pace, so 1994 isn't as ancient as it sounds for soil composition.
Yeah.
However, for active hazards, this is where it gets very current.
Oh, good.
If you dig into the fine print, the county is using a much more recent 2024 report. Report RI 286, to be specific.
That's practically yesterday.
Exactly. That comes from a joint effort by the Utah Geological Survey and the federal USGS, and it details quaternary faults and surface fault ruptures.
Okay, another geology term. What makes a fault quaternary?
Quaternary refers to the most recent geological time period, which covers roughly the last 2.6 million years.
Only 2.6 million years.
In geological terms, 2.6 million years is basically yesterday. So a quaternary fault is one that has been active relatively recently, which means it is considered a hazard for modern human infrastructure. They're tracking the cracks in the earth that could genuinely rupture during our lifetimes.
And they are tracking landslides too, right? The logs mentioned 2010 landslide maps broken down by 30 by 60 quadrangles. What does that mean?
A quadrangle map is a highly specific grid system used by geologists to divide up the Earth's surface. By breaking the landslide data down into these specific 30 by 60-minute grids, they're proving the sheer density of the hazard tracking happening here.
So it's not just a rough guess.
Far from it. They aren't just broadly pointing at a mountain range and warning people to watch out for falling rocks.
Yeah.
They have it gridded, modeled, and mathematically defined.
So what does this all mean? We have this incredibly dense geological and hydrological data. Quicksand soil, ancient earthquake faults, half-meter laser grids. But none of this exists in a vacuum. It all collides with human expansion.
That's the real tension.
We have to figure out how to build around, over, and through these natural features. I noticed the source material lists important habitat areas, gathering data from the Forest Service, the Department of Natural Resources, and Fish and Game. They are mapping rare plants and threatened species.
Yes.
These invisible ecological boundaries have to exist right alongside very strict, very human developments.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this intersection of natural risk and human development is most evident when we look at fire. Fire represents the ultimate collision between the natural environment and human habitation.
Especially out west.
Absolutely. The data points to 2 distinct layers for tracking this. First, you have the wildfire hazard areas, which is statewide data provided by the Utah DNR Wildfire Risk Assessment Portal.
So that's the big picture view.
Right. It's a broad state-level view of risk based on vegetation, topography, and climate. Often that's modeled using satellite imagery and broad algorithms. But then, layered right on top of that, you have something much more grounded called the wildland-urban interface.
I absolutely love the detail on this wildland-urban interface layer. It wasn't downloaded from some faceless federal server in Washington, D.C. The logs specifically state that this data was created by the Cache County Fire District.
Exactly. And the contrast is important. While the state is looking at satellite models, the local fire district is the one drawing the hard lines. The metadata actually names the individuals who created this layer: Rod Hammer, Craig Pettigrew, and Travis Peterson.
That is so cool. When you look at the fire boundary on a map of this county, you aren't just seeing a computer algorithm. You're seeing the direct, localized expertise of Rod, Craig, and Travis.
Real people making real decisions.
Exactly. These are probably guys who actually drive their trucks up into the foothills, look at the dry brush, look at the new subdivision being built, and figure out exactly where the wilderness ends and the human neighborhoods begin.
That local human touch is vital because local authorities are the ones who have to respond when those boundaries are tested. And this intersection of different jurisdictions extends beyond the ground.
Ooh. Where else does it go?
It goes straight up into the sky. The GIS records outline several FAA airport overlays. This involves massive federal airspace regulations crashing directly into local city planning.
How so? Like telling a homeowner they can't fly a kite.
More like telling a developer how tall they can build a roof. The county GIS division created data layers based on FAA Regulation Part 77.
Part 77.
Yes, which deals with proposed construction or alteration that might interfere with planes. If you are building a commercial structure or even erecting a tall crane for construction, Part 77 dictates the maximum height allowed so you don't clip a landing aircraft.
So if you want to build a tall cell tower, you aren't just checking the county's zoning rules. You are suddenly bumping into Federal Aviation Administration rules governing the invisible highways in the sky above your specific parcel of land.
And it isn't just height. The records also track the 65 LDN noise zones.
What's LDN?
It stands for Day-Night Average Sound Level. It is essentially a metric of how consistently loud an area is over a 24-hour period, weighing nighttime noise more heavily.
Because no one wants a jet engine waking them up at 2 a.m.
Precisely. If a local business owner or a residential developer wants to build inside a 65 LDN zone, the city might legally require them to install specific, expensive soundproof windows and specialized insulation.
Wow.
So a federal noise metric mapped by an aviation authority dictates the literal glass a local contractor has to buy.
That perfectly illustrates how all these layers stack up. But the document doesn't just look at what is happening right now, does it? I saw a section near the end called Future Annexation Areas.
Yes, those are polygons defined by the individual annexation policy plans of the local cities.
What exactly does that mean for the map?
This is where cities formally draw lines on a map declaring, we might not own this county land today, but based on our population growth projections, we plan to absorb this land into the city limits in the future.
So it's predicting the future?
It is the data of anticipation. They are drawing borders for cities that haven't fully expanded yet.
Wow. Okay, let's bring it all together. What started as a seemingly dry document titled Parcel Review GIS Metadata has turned out to be an incredible invisible tapestry.
It really is a tapestry.
We've traced lines that were hand-drawn onto 1980 FEMA paper maps and talked about the bureaucratic headaches of updating them. We've seen how 1994 university studies on soil liquefaction sit right next to cutting-edge 2024 earthquake fault reports.
Decades of science layered together.
Exactly. We've seen how a blurry 10-meter satellite grid gives way to a razor-sharp 0.5-meter laser scan of the valley floor. And we've realized how massive federal FAA regulations regarding noise and height overlap perfectly with hyper-local fire boundaries drawn up by guys at the county fire district.
They're all connected.
The main takeaway for you, the listener, is this. Whenever you look at a plot of land, whether it is a sprawling park, a farm, or your own backyard, there is a literal mountain of hidden data dictating its past, its present, and its future.